Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars for the Anaphylaxis Campaign taking place during our Allergy Awareness Week. We've had several of these webinars, as you know, and they're incredibly popular. It will be recorded, it will be available on our website, and together with a Q&A, it will be accessible to all our members. Tonight's webinar is a conversation with Jo Frost. Now, Jo is probably far better known to most of you as Super Nanny, and she's also one of our patrons and has been a very good friend of the Anaphylaxis Campaign over the years. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Jo this evening. The format will be, I will introduce and tell you a little bit about Jo, and then this webinar will take the form of a conversation between Jo and myself. So first of all, a little bit about Jo. And Jo is internationally recognised as a parenting expert, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with her television programmes over the years when she's in her guise as Super Nanny. She has over 30 years experience in doing this. She looks too young to have 30 years experience. She's had over 30 years experience of doing this. And she's an award-winning best-selling author, as well as a TV host and expert. And she's also founder of Nanny Jo Productions, which has produced shows such as Nanny on Tour, Britain's Killer Kids, golly, that sounds a little bit dangerous, and Extreme Parental Guidance. But that's only part of what Jo does, because she's also a global ambassador for the United Nations Shot at a Life campaign. She obviously is one of our patrons and does work for us as well. She also works for the Young Minds organisation, which is a charity that supports emotional, mental health issues for children and young people. And she also gives service to other charities such as the Book Trust, which we're a huge fan of, the Anaphylaxis Campaign, Save the Children, and other leading cancer foundations. So it's absolutely great that Jo's able to join us this evening. And I'm going to ask Jo just a few questions to get the conversation going. And to start with, Jo, I know that you yourself are affected by severe allergies. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what your allergies actually are and when they were diagnosed?
My allergies were diagnosed when I was in my formative years. So 5, 6, 7, that sort of age gap, that sort of age range. And I'm anaphylaxis to all nuts, shellfish, and horses. And I have seasonal allergies with just about most things: dust, pollen, mold, animals. Yeah, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit to navigate, to say the least.
And on the food side of things, it's primarily peanuts? Or is it?
No, I'm allergic to all nuts. So I have anaphylaxis to all types of nuts and crustacean. So crab, lobster, shrimp. I can eat fish, which we know is different protein. So it's the crustacean, it's shellfish. Yes.
And so you've got quite a range of allergies of different types there. And that's not unusual, because we know there are up to 170 foods alone that people can be allergic to, and 2/3 of people are allergic to more than one thing. So yeah, you're not unusual in that way. What's the thing that it's most difficult to avoid?
Well, I was going to say to you, it felt back then unusual, you know, because back then it would have been in the 80s. So, you know, when I think about the difference in the awareness that we have today, as far as the conversation that's happening now and how that has changed over, you know, 30, 40 years, it's a big difference, of course. You know, for back then, when I was 6 and 7 years old, you know, we didn't have social media, right? We didn't have social media. So it was more a case of the dialogue that you would have with a doctor, you know, and it was by default, you know. So I feel that in itself is very different with respects to the education and the awareness that we have today, and the continuous dialogue around normalizing the importance of inclusion around anaphylaxis and other allergies. Hence, I also have asthma, so they're related. You know, I can get asthma and seasonal asthma, as well as allergies, and then the anaphylaxis. So I just wanted to point that out, you know, because of course, you know, back then, that's the 80s, which is, you know, a growing stead in what we've seen with respect to the increase in numbers, you know, for now. But to answer the immediate question, you navigate everything, you know, everything in your life at that point, once you are diagnosed, which was in those formative years, really becomes about you hearing about it. And I can remember very clearly my childhood, like yesterday. I can recall it very, very quickly, because emotionally, certainly for me, there were times that I had to navigate in circumstances that had become problematic, and you remember those incidences. So I would say, you know, you navigate everything. You're vigilant about everything that you do from that moment that you are diagnosed with what your medical condition is, and exactly what does that mean. You want layman terms, you want doctors to break it down. And I would say that that's most important, that the conversation that's had for any adult or parent or, you know, child, teenager in the room, but if you really don't understand what your allergist is telling you or your doctor, to, you know, be brave enough to say, I really don't understand what you're talking about. I do not understand the medical word that you've used. What does that really mean? How does that parlay into my life and, you know, how I'm living my life? I think it's really important to do that, because it meant that I had to navigate everything moving forward when I became responsible enough to really venture out there on my own. You know, like any parent, they did educate me from a young age. And certainly there was this attitude that I did not see when I was younger, because it was just my mum and dad. But certainly as I got older, there was this real appreciation in how they chose to live alongside my medical condition and really empower me in the way that they showed up, their attitudes, the way that they were very controlled, the way that they led by example in being thorough, without the emotional hype and anxiety.
Do you
So
remember
I feel
what it was like for you at school? Could you say you were about 8 years old when you were
yes,
diagnosed?
yes. The teachers were aware. The teachers were aware of me having anaphylaxis, and they were aware of my allergies as well, because of course certain times of the year that would be a lot worse. And I remember the kids at school not really knowing much about it. They didn't really know, and I only had a limited capacity of what I knew with respect to what I do know now, of course. But it became very clear that certain things needed to be avoided, because they would be life-threatening for me. you know, and that meant that it was putting me into a dangerous situation. And, you know, I'm sure when you ask that question, we go to immediately, was there support? Or was there bullying? Or was I ridiculed for that? And the answer was no.
That's great to hear.
The answer was no. It was, I'm going to say it felt quite novel, because those numbers have increased over the years. And in a way, I guess you could say that that was more isolating, and at least we feel less alone now, knowing that there are other teenagers and other parents that are experiencing it. But I never knew anybody in my immediate circle that had anaphylaxis or any type of allergies. None of my family have anaphylaxis or any allergies. You know, I was the one that had, you know, that medical condition. Not even my friends. There wasn't, you know, out of all the group of friends, there wasn't one.
Yes, and we know because David Redding established our charity 27 years ago. And he established it because his daughter died at the age of 17 after eating food, a pie in a cafe in Guildford. And she asked if it had nuts in, and they said no, and it did, and she died. And being a journalist, he was appalled by the lack of information and established the Anaphylaxis Campaign. So certainly in the 80s, there was not a lot of information around. I'm sure your recollection is absolutely correct. Can I just ask you, because you do a lot of traveling, Jo, as part of your job, I know you crossed the Atlantic many times, though with COVID, of course, that's a little bit restricted now, shall we say, and still is restricted. But taking COVID aside, we're always asked about tips for traveling. How do you cope with all those allergies, including your food allergies? How do you prepare yourself for traveling? What tips can you pass on to other people?
I'm like the CIA, Lynn. I'm like the CIA. Like, I want to know what the policies are. I want to know, you know, what airlines certainly have a policy of having nuts on board or not nuts on board. And I have learned the hard way too. So I'm a very well-traveled lady. I was a very well-traveled teenager. You know, my parents were like, get out there, see the world. It's the best education you're going to get. So they were very supportive of my brother and I traveling. You know, he traveled a lot more than me, and we were both very well-traveled. So we never felt this, you know, and I certainly never, with my medical condition, of feeling like I couldn't travel, that I couldn't get on a plane, boat, wherever, and see the rest of the world. But it meant that homework needed to be done. So it meant that I needed to not just look at what was written on a website or what was written up, you know, making those phone calls, actually speaking to people again, making sure that I take my own food. So I prepare to take my own food, depending on, you know, really how long the flight is. Is it going to be an 11-hour flight, or is it going to be a 22-hour because I'm taking a pit stop and then I'm going off again? So, you know, you're planning, you know, your route, you're planning where your pit stops are, you know, you're looking at your routine, you're going to get hungry around then, take your extra stuff on board with you. And, you know, you pre-board, there are certain airlines. It's been very inconsistent. There's, you know, as far as it's been inconsistent with the reliability of airlines to show up consistently in being able to say, we're all on the same page. What I realized is that ground crew are very different to the pirates in the air, meaning the flight attendants have a whole different agenda to what the ground crew tell you on the ground. So, you know, I'd like people to be aware of that as much as you make those phone calls and you're in control of making sure that you get names, who you spoke to, the facts that you were given, making sure that those special requirements are in there. you can't be any safer than packing the food yourself, right? And pre-boarding and wiping down. And it varies where you are with different airlines and what countries you're in. We are more, I would say, having been very well versed now of crossing over the pond. I think we are more well versed in the UK. We've still a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do here in the USA. A lot of work.
I'm very interested that you say that, because as a charity, we work with loads of countries all over the world. We're very active members of the international community, and we work with other charities in countries all over the world. And I'd be very interested to hear personally how we compare to the USA.
I think we have more information. I do think we have more information, and there's a tone. There's a tone, a general tone, and I believe it's because of the education, because of the awareness, that there is a tone of being able to accommodate the reality of understanding that inclusion is important. Our health and safety is just as important as somebody without anaphylaxis, without somebody else. So I find that I get met with flight attendants that every now and then you go on board, you do your pre-check, you've got your food, you tell them you've got your food. They ask whether you've got your EpiPens on you, because they don't carry any EpiPens on board. Yet they carry defibrillators, but they don't carry any EpiPens. So they want to make sure you've got your own. And then they split the carriages. So in my case, being allergic to nuts, coach may have nuts, first class might not, first class might be served, coach maybe not. And then you have to deal with a personality. So I could sell through, everything was planned, all sold through. And then I get onto the plane and I say, hey, I just want to let you know, you've probably already been told that I have anaphylaxis. And you wait for the acknowledgement and the body language that totally reassures you, right, that they get it. And very, very quickly, like, oh yeah, okay. And what I've learned is that so many people, if they don't know something, they would rather just give oh yes, that seems like a very fake confidence about knowing what that word means. And I really feel very strongly that we need to keep up the good work of using the word anaphylaxis. People need to understand the word anaphylaxis, because in America, it has been meshed sometimes into the word allergies. And then through media narratives and TV and magazines and online content, we think that, other people think that it's just an allergy, like a runny nose or, just an irritation, a little flare, not a life-threatening allergy. And so there's a lot of myths and debunking that needs to happen with the reality of the difference between having allergies and having life-threatening anaphylaxis. So once being on board, you then have to gauge who you're talking to. Because in America, I've been met with, absolutely, I know exactly what that is. And we have made sure we've accommodated, don't worry, we've let people know on board. We will do the announcements now whilst people are coming on board. We will do the announcements as we're leaving and we're up in the air. Or you can meet somebody, which I had the experience of meeting, called Cindy, who basically looks at you and says, sorry, we serve nuts, we can't do anything about it, it's our policy. And at that moment, when you know that you have to get on a plane because you're about to help a family, your communication skills come in rather handy. Because then you go to a place of, how can you help me? So that I can get on the plane and be safe like everybody else. What can you do for me? And there is this moment where you realize that you're being met with an ignorance of somebody not knowing and now being difficult. The word is difficult, and not wanting to understand that they truly have within themselves the power to change the outcome of making everybody safe on that plane. And unfortunately for me, I had a very bad experience with American Airlines and a flight attendant who said to me, well, you'll be safest. I see you're sitting in the first class. You'll be safest as you sit right at the back. But I'm sure you're not going to want to do that, are you? As you've got somewhere to go, correct? And I said, well, if that's going to be the safest place for me, then yeah, give my ticket to somebody, you know, which I did. I sat right at the back with a mask on, a face scarf. I had 2 handheld fans, and I cried all the way back home, you know, because I'd been humiliated, and this woman did not have the empathy, you know, or clearly the education to be in a space where she would take the lead, you know, and really do something that I believe is her job to do as a flight attendant, and to represent a brand that keeps everybody safe, everybody included. So you navigate well, and you use your voice, and you recognize that you have a choice in that moment to educate and to help the situation by making somebody see where you're coming from so they can be more empathetic. Or for some people, I know that they, you know, it leads to a place of them getting frustrated, and then there's emotion, and then it becomes heated, and at that moment, nothing can get resolved.
I know people have very varying experiences, and we spend a lot of time working with individual airlines to and they are variable. They are variable.
Yeah, very consistent.
Bearing in mind all of that, Joe, and I hear the fact that you've had some quite difficult experience. Presumably, you are still going to travel now. When we're allowed to travel.
Yeah. The point of me really talking about the bad experience that I had is that I want people to recognize that that's going to happen. I don't want people to feel that it's not ever going to happen. You know, we've come a long way, and we still have so much more work to do. And the only way that we get to do that work is if we can really stand up and be our own champions, and hope that the people around us and the people that we talk to and the people that don't know, we get to impart our wisdom, our information to help them understand, to help them learn, because I believe that education and awareness equals empathy for more understanding, to change those policies and laws. And I'd rather it be that way than people turn around in fear and say, we better change something because somebody has passed away. And if one person has passed away, that's one person too many. And we know of those stories already. So, you know, the point of talking about an experience that was very difficult and adverse for me is that it didn't put me off. At that moment, I recognized, and I have recognized throughout my teenage years and into my young 20s and 30s, that there's a choice that you make. You can either make a choice to be defeated by it, and for it to really get you down to a place that you feel victimized by it, and that the world is closed off to you. Or you say, right, I'm going to deal with this like an element of water. I'm going to be fluid. I'm going to do exactly what I can do. I'm going to trust my gut. I'm going to recognize that, have I marked off every point that I can? Have I double checked and checked again? Do not take it personal if somebody's offended, that you need to take hold of the reins and make that phone call yourself, because that's part and parcel of us being let down. And we need to feel that we're in control of the situation to make sure that everything is in good stead, as much as it possibly can be for us in that moment in time. So, you know, I share that story because I am well traveled, because it hasn't put me off doing anything that I've wanted to do, you know.
And I think that's excellent advice. And we all also share lots of information and stories.
You do.
And then we have parents getting in touch with us because their child has reached that age where they want to travel and perhaps go abroad. We've got lots of examples of youngsters in, not obviously in the last 12 months or so, because we've had COVID, but prior to that, 18 and 19-year-olds who've gone to Thailand on their gap years with severe food allergies, including nuts. And if you've been to Thailand, you know that peanuts particularly are used a lot in the cuisine. And they have a fabulous time, even if their mum and their dad turn grey at home during that period. And they write those experiences up. And I think people actually find that enormously helpful.
Incredibly helpful. I mean, even so, I mean, there are so many available apps as well that can make it easier for us in the allergy community. Like, I used to back then, you know, look at where I was going to, and there would be random sentences that I would, because there was no phones back then, no cell phones to translate, Google Translate. I would write down, you know, what my allergies were and write down in that language so that they could read it. Now there are apps that you can, you know, show if you're in a restaurant, in a foreign language place, to translate. But you learn, you do learn, and you learn this, I believe, as a child, becoming an adult, with the example from your parents. And if you never had it from your parents, you know that you get to a place where, in order to look after yourself, it means that you have to step outside the comfort zone. You have to step outside the area of not worrying about what people are thinking or saying, when you need to stand up for yourself and make sure that your safety is a priority. And I know that's something that I've heard. You know, I'm a pain. They think I'm being a nuisance. Then you hear people gathering. In my circumstance, being a public figure, it was here, Joe Frost, you know, entitled, special, needed to be treated special, you know, because I was in the public eye, and I just, far from wanting to be treated special. I just want inclusion. I just want the same as everybody else.
Can I move on to a different area, and it's one that's really very important to people, and that's the whole experience of eating out. And again, you know, particularly when you're traveling, we know a lot of people, when they do travel, if they're affected by severe allergies or their children are affected by severe allergies, they tend to self-cater, take their own food. But eating out is a fabulous experience. We all enjoy it. We appreciate that if you have got severe allergies, it's very difficult to be spontaneous. But it's one of life's great pleasures. Hopefully, we're all going to be able to, well, we can do it at the moment, can't we? We're now allowed to, certainly in the UK inside, instead of freezing outside as we were for a month or so. But have you got any tips, if you like, in terms of how you cope with eating out? Because I'm sure with the peripatetic lifestyle that you have, that's something that you do a lot.
Preparation. So nowadays, because we do have, because we do have our phones, because most restaurants have online stuff, I'll double check. So I'll go on to the website and I'll take a look at the menus, and I'll see what's available. I'll see if it is predominantly, maybe, you know, it could be a fish house. And in that case, you know, if it's strong with seafood as well, then I know that just the smell alone would be a problem for me. So I like to be prepared and organized by looking on the websites to look at the menus, just to see what type of menu they have. And then I would always double check once I arrived at the restaurant as well, to speak to the manager, to then call out the chef. I want to know what's been cooked, what oils it's being cooked in, if something, what flours, because now we have so many different flours. That includes now the sort of trend of having plant-based food for myself, where it's mixed, that plant-based is mixed with a lot of cashew paste and different ingredients. So yet again, I want to know what the detail is in the ingredients. That's important for me. If I'm going to a different country, so I like to frequent Spain and Italy, as Spain typically uses a lot of almonds, as well as in Dubai. So I'll tend to stay away from the pastries, not a bad thing, but I'll tend to stay away from the pastries.
They're the best thing.
I know this is not a bad thing for me to stay away from them, but I'll tend to, just know that that's a no-no for me. There are just some things that are a no-no, and because of the flour that they may use. So again, it is a lot of research. It's, again, being prepared, being organized, and it's a confidence within yourself over time with practice, because it's repetition, that you become very comfortable in being in a restaurant, having done your research, having done your prep, and then needing to speak to people who will not only tell you the ingredients of what's in what you're asking for, but also it's a delight if you see a menu that has the allergens at the bottom with the little emoji signs, and then you can go one step further in asking what those ingredients are. However, I would like to see restaurants take accountability in not only presenting on the menus what the immediate allergens are, but also the ingredients. A book that will allow us to be able to look at the full ingredients for those that have milk and wheat allergies, so that they, are able to make the choices that they need to enjoy. Because the one thing about us who have allergies and anaphylaxis, if we have a great, safe experience, we're your best customers. We'll go back there and go back there and go back there again, because we know we're safe, to enjoy. So, it's important, I believe, for the attention to be given as we're opening back up and restaurants are opening back up, for them to take the accountability and being able to do this. So certainly being abroad, I'll look at the country, like I've said, and then it's the catering, and then it's the ingredients and the menus. And I would say also, I am a, and maybe other people are, I'm not too sure. If you're listening to this, please write in and, just type in and let me know if you are. But I'm a creature of comfort with certain foods that I know are safe as well. So I can't go wrong with those. So there are certain foods that will be like a yes for me. If it all looks a little bit difficult, I know they're the safe foods. I know I can definitely have that. That will be fine. I can eat that, But again, you have to weave through it. You could go for a Caesar salad and then the dressing's on the side, but what are the fresh made croutons made of, right? So again, you've got to be able to ask. It's having the voice to ask the questions so that you are in control of a situation that you don't find yourself helpless in. And I think we have to take the lead to be able to do that. And the reason why I have this confidence is because it was taught to me at a very young age that it seemed just very natural for me to be able to say, can I ask you one more question, please? And it's not done in a way that's apologetic, like, excuse me, can I ask you one more question? Or I'm sorry. But it's not arrogant either. It's like, do you mind if I ask you one more question? Because I do have a concern here and I just want to double check, And it's always, you hope, but I am going to tell you, you have to read through the lines to trust your gut, that sometimes somebody will say, I'm not too sure. And they'll leave it at that. And you have to be able to say, could you ask for me? Because I'd really appreciate that. So there is a language that allows you to not just stop at somebody telling you no, because you would like to enjoy the experience. You would like to be in the restaurant. You would like to be here and have that meal and to enjoy it. But you want others to be able to help you do that if you've come to the end of the road and you've done everything you can do.
And a questions, we've got a couple of questions on this area. It's obviously one that is really important to people and it's very topical at the moment.
Yes.
But one of the questions we've had is, you mentioned how you like to have that extra information as well as the communication verbally. When you're having that information and it's on a menu, for example, would you prefer the actual wording of the ingredients, symbols, or a numbered key? We know about 56% of restaurants at the moment do this anyway, but it's about what you as a user, if you like, as a person with severe allergies, which way do you like that information expressed?
Well, I'm detail orientated, and I will read the small print of everything. However, we are very visual learners these days because of the way that we've got used to the technology era now. So I would just want to see it. So if a restaurant has it, I'm appreciative of how it shows up. But for myself personally, I would like to see the visual representation, so the emojis of that, the pictures of that alongside the menu, but then I'm going to want the details. So I may see a particular food which shows me, you know, it has this particular allergen or it's free of this particular allergen, but I'm still going to follow up. I'm still going to say,
yeah,
I see that this emoji sign has that it's not, it's not free of its allergen, but can I ask, is that freshly prepared or is it already prepared with something that is X, Y, and Z? So I'll always still follow up because my life deserves that time to ask the questions in detail, because I have had several anaphylaxis, several times I've gone into anaphylactic shock, and that is not something that I ever want to do. I want to avoid that. That's a horrifying experience for me. So everything you're doing is to bring you into a space of enjoying being in the moment. Your attitude is one that, is not feeling defeated by it. So now, it's my backpack, it's what's with me. My medical condition lives alongside me. It's not, it's not a third leg, it doesn't define me. My anaphylaxis doesn't define me. It's a medical condition that I have. And I work alongside that to my best ability. And when I'm in doubt, it's a no. So the emojis, yes, but I'm still going to ask. So I still would say to people, still please ask until you are most definitely confident about the information that you're receiving, how you're receiving it, and if you're not, speak up again, And on the flip side of that, though, I will say there's a very fine line, so I don't want it to be misinterpreted, that as much as we're vigilant about what we do, we also have to keep our anxiety and our emotions in check as well, right? Because we don't want it to become irrational.
Yeah, can I move us on a little bit?
Yes.
Because your expertise is in working with families and with children.
Yes.
How do you help these families with these children manage when they find out that they have a child with severe allergies? Is it something that you come across?
Well, I'm still learning, so I wouldn't call myself an expert at all in this field, because I still think that I'm the pupil, although I'm able to give my own personal experiences. But how I do help families is being able to lessen that anxiety so that it's more driven in the energy, being more organized, being more prepared. So, the energy that's used for that anxiety gets channeled into a space of empowerment, of right, what can we do? how will we make this easier for ourselves as a family? How will we prepare? What can we do? Who can we call? The conversations that we will have beforehand, perhaps maybe scenarios that we'll set up with the children. I've worked with families even on my shows. I do remember little Ava, who was absolutely petrified to talk about her anaphylaxis in a restaurant, and cried and got very upset because she had felt complete anxiety, but embarrassment. But that was also a case of this heightened anxiety from her mother, you know, being really, really scared of every time they stepped outside their home in a space that she felt not in control with. And that can almost be like a virus itself and be contagious, because we can create such hysteria that we now, by example, have sort of rubbed that off onto our kids, and they can see that. So when we can feel certainly that we've done all the work and the preparation, the organization, when we can set up a scenario with our kids saying, you know, hey, you know, make sure when we get to the restaurant, this is what we're going to do. You know, I'd love you to be able to voice this. Again, you're empowering your children. You're working with the family to lessen in a very prospective way, and it's something that you feel only when you're with a family, how to control that fight or flight. You know, that immediate heightened reactive response of fight or flight, because your body has been so used to being in a space of feeling threatened that it overreacts to everything. So sometimes I may be helping families that are in a very heightened space where the body perceives everything as a threat. Your body will literally go into shaking and dry mouth and feeling, you know, butterflies and tightening in the chest just at the thought of being in the car and going to a restaurant or getting to the airport. So the work that gets done there takes time. It's a lot of talk therapy. It's techniques to be able to breathe through those moments, to give a mental check down, look at the action plan that you have in place so that you can reassure yourself. And I'm teaching the families to do that as they then pass that on to their children as well. And as I say, you know, I'm not clear of that. I have gone into anaphylactic shock. I have asked and I have done my due diligence with work, and I, you know, have misread at times and, you know, I trusted and I was let down, you know, at times. And unfortunately, when that does happen, and you thank God that you're alive and you recognize that you deal for a good 2 weeks afterwards, the trauma of that, you then implement completely the regulation of being able to put things into perspective again. What did you learn from the experience? What is it that you felt at the moment was okay? Could you really have not have controlled the situation? By then, was it really out of your hands and you was let down? You know, is it a place that you now feel you can go back again because they've shown a lack of ability to communicate, to understand, to train their staff, to represent as a restaurant inclusion for everybody? So there's no one size fit all. Everybody's experience is different. There's certainly no right or wrong way in how you go about doing what I'm saying. You'll eventually get to that yourselves, but being informed and understanding more, and again, being able to read verbal and body language, and being able to, I think with the younger kids, it's really good to pre-scenarios of things that might happen as well.
Yeah.
So you
look
here, you might get asked this, or this might happen. And sometimes parents get really protective, right? So the child might start to ask and then look at the parent and stop talking. And at that moment, I would always encourage a parent like, tell us she's doing really well, you know, and just keep going. It's absolutely fine, because you're encouraging your child to continue voicing, right, and championing for themselves. And that's really important.
And we're having some lovely comments coming in, Joe. So people are really appreciating the fact that you're so happy to share, which is great. And one's just come in, and it's a lovely comment from somebody who said how lovely it is to hear you speaking so frankly and confidently. And what they would like to ask you is what the situation was when you had anaphylaxis, presumably your first experience, if you remember it, if you're happy to speak about that.
Yes, my first experience was, how old was I? I want to say I was 7, maybe 6 or 7. I think I was 6 or 7. And my father had taken my brother and I to the Royal Tournament. Do you remember the Royal Tournament?
Yes.
The Queens. I'm going to sound really old now, right? So
you're not as old as me, Joe. It's okay.
It was the Royal Tournament. So the Queen's Guards and her whole brigade would do this yearly Royal Tournament, right, at Else Court. And, you know, it was a big show, fanfare, you know, of feathers and horses, parade and collage and, you know, the whole thing. So my father had brought tickets to take us, you know, my brother and I, and we were really excited about it. You know, we were going to go to this big show, day out with Dad. And I remember being quite at the front, you know, and being excited to be able to kind of lean over to see all the horses coming past. And at that moment, the horses did come past, and there was a whole gather of like dust and everything else, and smell of horse and hay and everything. And I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. And then my father told me afterwards, you know, a bit afterwards, right, that I, you know, got into anaphylaxis. So I remember I couldn't breathe. And I remember my throat being really itchy. And I remember I was just pouring from everywhere. I was dribbling, my nose was just running, my mouth had swollen up, my eyes had closed up. And at that point, I remember running. I literally remember running. Like, my dad had my brother, he was carrying in, and we were just running. And we were running to St. John's Ambulance. So they would always have at these events, you know, these conferences and events and places, a St. John's Ambulance. And I remember my father just like literally like, we need to go, let's go. And we were just running. And we got to the St. John's Ambulance, and I remember I just remember the feeling emotionally that I remember. Everything was controlled apart from the fact that we were running. My dad was very calm, but we were running, you know, as best as we could, right? And we got to St. John's Ambulance, and they had the ambulance there. We got in, you know, we went in, and they must have done, I just remember it all being calm. And then they must have just, you know, gave me an epinephrine, right? They must have given me epinephrine, and then going, obviously, from in that ambulance, we went to the hospital.
So, considering you were, I mean, I don't expect you to tell me how old you are, but considering that happened so many years ago, you obviously have an incredibly clear recollection, Joe. And we do find that when we talk to children, as they get older, they do remember their experiences.
Yeah, we remember, you know, we do. I think we remember, because I think what's really important to talk about today is the importance of, especially in a space where we are talking about destigmatizing and normalizing these conversations around mental health, that the importance of recognizing that there is post-trauma, right, after an event like that. So, you know, for children that may have experienced this for a couple of times, it stays very vivid. Now, my memory recall, is good anyway. But I feel that, a threatening situation like that, you're going to remember as a young child. And I think it's important for people to remember that, even though 24 hours, 48 hours afterwards, and the event and the symptoms have subsided, the epinephrine, has kicked in, and the person is to that effect not in that critical life-threatening stage. I think it's important for parents and for adults that have this experience to nurture and to be compassionate to yourself in recognizing what you've just truly been through. What you've truly been through.
And this we're coming to a close, Joe, but there's another question that I must ask you that has come in, and it's, what's the best piece of advice families managing children with severe allergies need to hear? What do you think is the best piece of advice?
Oh, there's too much. You can't pin it to one. You just couldn't, because every piece of advice, is good advice that leads us towards awareness and education, again, in being able to champion for ourselves. I continuously say to parents, your children are not defined by the medical conditions that they have. They're just not. And I feel that our mentality and the way we approach and our attitude towards our medical conditions make a very big difference in a child's life, in how they move forward and thrive in life. And I am an example of that. I'm an example of that. I've lived, and I continue to live, a great, life of travel. And, it's not dampened who I am, the spirit of who I am. I'm just somebody that, is cautious, who simply lives alongside having a medical condition called anaphylaxis. So, I would say, for that, I'm grateful for my parents for, so I would say that any parent that can empower their child in that way, that what they do now has a lasting impact into their adulthood, and how they embrace their own medical conditions without being defined by it.
Well, that's a fantastic piece of advice, Joe. Can I just say thank you so much for taking part in this webinar this evening. It's been great.
Thank you.
We will, it will be recorded. We will put it on the website. We will send you any of the further questions that we haven't had time to answer this evening, and then we'll pass those on to you. Thank you for all the great work that you continue to do for the Anaphylaxis Campaign.
Thank you.
And I just thank you for, and I'm sure everybody has enjoyed the conversation this evening as much as I have. So,
I hope so.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's been listening, and to keep going to the website, because that's where we're getting this information, and to keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much, and we will all be in touch. And again, a big thank you to everyone who's listened this evening, and have a good evening, everyone.